Welcome everybody. I think we'll get started. It's 11:30, or it's a half hour on the hour here. So this is another sixth panel titled Building a Nickel Mine in Canada. My name is Matthew Mickelber. I'm the host of Junior Resource Investing Podcast. Just a reminder that this is some laundry list items here for you. This is being recorded and that there's a live Q&A at the end. So please enter your questions into the chat box on the side, and if it fits into the flow of the conversation, I'll answer them as we go. And if not, I'll make sure that we carve out time at the end for your questions. So yeah, please, let's try to make this a little bit dynamic and interactive, okay? Building a nickel mine in Canada. I think if you're here, you understand that there's huge potential for exponential demand growth that we're already seeing start. Estimates suggest that by 2030 that the world is going to need to see 40 to 60 new nickel mines, each producing 30,000 tons per year of nickel to meet that anticipated demand. For context, Voisey's Bay is 10th-ish largest in the world right now, and it produces 35 to 40,000 tons per year. So just if you're keeping track at home, that means we need 40 new Voisey's Bays within the next 7 years to meet this oncoming demand crunch. And of course, geopolitical realities are only going to amplify these pressures. The world, as we see, risks falling into regionalized camps, which further underscores the need to secure resource independence for critical minerals. So the fact that we need more nickel is undeniable, but the question is, where will it come from? Canada obviously is an obvious opportunity as a tier 1 Western jurisdiction to help bridge this supply gap. But even within Canada, not all jurisdictions are the same. There are important distinctions and variations on a province-by-province basis. And what I find interesting here today is the 4 gentlemen I have with me here, 4 different provinces, 4 different projects, but they're all accomplishing the same goal, trying to advance and pursue a nickel mine. So I'm excited this is going to be a good conversation. I'm kind of hoping we can get into the weeds a bit of jurisdictional advantages in Canada and distinctions as well. But so we've got Sean Sampson, President or CEO of EB Nickel and their Shaw Dome project in Ontario. Terry Lynch, CEO of Power Nickel with their NISC project in Quebec. Martin Turin, who is the CEO of FPX Nickel and the Dakar project in BC, and Ian Fraser, CEO of Fathom Nickel with their Albert Lake and Goshager Lake projects in Saskatchewan. Gentlemen, thank you for joining me today. How are you guys doing?
Thanks for having us, Matthew. Good to be here.
Great to be here. Thank you, Matthew.
Yeah, thanks. And Martin's the only new face, so yeah, Martin, I guess we'll do a little digital handshake here. Nice to meet you. But you know what? I think this is we've got kind of West versus East here, so this is my chance, Revenge of the West. I'm going to have you have a chance to kind of go through your stories a bit and just kind of set the table for us for who you are and what you've got going on. But yeah, we're not starting. Toronto can go last at this time, but we're going to start with BC, right? So we'll work from BC over to Quebec. So Martin, do you want to lead the way? Why don't you just tell us about your project? You know, is it large? Is it small? What stage is it at? But then, right, trying to stay on topic too as well. Why is BC the right place to build your kind of project? And what kind of advantages does BC offer you that you think makes it uniquely positive for investors and for developers?
Thanks, Matt. Good to see my fellow panelists here, and thanks everyone for joining. So yeah, I'm Martin Turin with FPX Nickel. We are a Vancouver-based company, and we're focused on the development of the Baptiste Nickel Project, which is located in central BC on the traditional and unceded territories of the Clausen Nation, Benche Wuten Nation, and the Takla and Yukutji First Nations as well. Just in terms of a thumbnail sketch quickly of Baptiste, we just completed a preliminary feasibility study. It outlines the potential development of a very large-scale nickel project, producing about 59,000 tons of nickel per year over almost a 30-year mine life. So this would be one of the 10 largest nickel operations in the world. Attractive economics at a relatively modest assumed nickel price at $8.75 a pound. C1 operating costs under $4 US a pound. So potential here for a high margin, low cost producer for a long time to come, producing a product that can go either into the stainless or the battery supply chain. In terms of BC, one of the advantages I think that often gets overlooked is really that proximity to Asia. We have the potential here to deliver a product that would go to one of several deep water ports on the west coast of Canada, and then have great accessibility to use ocean freight, which is, of course, a very low-cost form of shipment, either down south to the United States or critically to Japan and Korea. Those are obviously two important global auto producing countries. They're countries that are competing very vigorously with China with respect to auto production. And unlike China, they have not done as much to secure sources of raw materials over the last 10 years as China has. And so they're playing a bit of catch up. And so our proximity to those markets is actually very important. And we're seeing that already in some of the strategic engagement that we have with parties in Japan and Korea. So I'll just maybe start with that point on the geographical advantages of BC, and then I'm sure we can go deeper into some of those topics here as we go.
Perfect. Thank you, Martin. And Ian, on to you, moving east.
All right, moving east into the province of Saskatchewan. As you mentioned, Matt, we have two projects, the Albert Lake project and the Ochagger Lake project. These are nickel, copper, cobalt, plus platinum group element projects. And, I think what's attracted us to both of these, I must say, the fellow panel members here are a little further along with the development of their projects. We're still very much in the exploration phase, but having said that, both projects do have a history. One was a very small mine, the Albert Lake project, a small mine, 1965 through 1969, that produced some fantastic grades. And the second project, there was a resource delineated there, 1966 through 1970, but grades and tons were not deemed economic then and are not deemed economic currently. But we feel that, again, this is sort of exploration stage here. These are two world-class magmatic nickel type deposits or settings, and we just feel there's tremendous upside to explore both of them vigorously and get them into the stage where, like fellow panel members here, we're that much closer to announcing potential production down the road. And with respect to the province of Saskatchewan, I think what we like about Saskatchewan, again, geologically, it's got all the right rocks. It's the province off to the east, Manitoba, host to the world-class Thompson Nickel Belt. We're in the same jurisdiction of geology, if you will. And the province as a whole has been overlooked for base metals because it's so endowed with uranium that has been sort of the focus for a lot of exploration in Saskatchewan. But having said that, Saskatchewan has the advantage of knowing how to get things into production from a jurisdiction point of view. So I think that too, very, very favorably, tremendous relationships with First Nations, continuing to engage with them, and they too have a sort of a pro-development outlook on things.
Thank you, Ian. Sean, on to you.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks everybody for joining. So my company, EV Nickel, has 30,000 hectares, just 30 kilometers outside Timmins, Ontario. So we're a Toronto-based company, but our project's in Timmins, just outside town. It's basically a suburban project, so to speak. We have road access and power access there. Across that land package, we have two completed resources now. We have a 1 billion ton 0.24 nickel grade. We call it our large scale. It's our Carlang A zone. Those 1 billion tons, we think, are the first 20% of the Carlang trend. We know that from grab samples and historic drilling. So we're pretty comfortable with saying that there's a huge amount of that 0.25 nickel. And what's really interesting, as compared to other large-scale projects across the Abitibi, is that ours comes to surface. So we have minimal overburden. Others are buried beneath sort of 40 meters of muck. Ours actually comes up outcrops. So that's our low-grade, large-scale, as we call it, the Carlang A zone, where we have the starter resource with 1 billion tons. Then I have a high-grade resource we came out with earlier this year, which is a little over 2 million tons at about 1% nickel within 400 meters of surface. We could open pit some of that, but that's a very nice grade to potentially chase underground with a mine. So we're at resource stage. We've got our main exploration risk behind us. We think there's a huge amount of exploration potential across our land package. We're very excited with where we are. Again, just outside a major mining city, best known for gold, but we think its future is likely base metals. So we're just outside Timmins. Where we are is within 1,000 kilometers of Detroit as well. So going down into that I-75 corridor with all the battery plants, in addition to the battery plants that are being built in Southern Ontario, we think we're located very, very well for the downstream demand. And then the next thing we really like about our location is in Northern Ontario, we draw hydropower. So whatever we can electrify from a carbon cost perspective is very low. And then there's the permitting thing. I don't think we could be in a better place in the world than we are. We're in an area that already has mines. We're in an area that's hugely supportive of new mine development. We've got completely aligned First Nations who themselves are very, very understanding of the mining business. And importantly, our First Nations partners realize that the most important thing is to align and develop projects the right way, and knowing that they begin to get their economic benefit when you get into operations. So we're in an area where the First Nations are already have royalty deals on gold mines. So we're very well set up with the community, the First Nations communities, and we have huge support from our provincial government, which has invested directly in our company, in our R&D arm for our clean nickel research. And I really like the way how our province is completely aligned with the federal government, and they recognize the imperative of bringing this nickel into production.
No, well said. And Terry, I'll let you have the final thoughts on this one.
Yeah, so obviously Power Nickel is advancing the NISC project in near Nemaska, Quebec. And it's a high-grade nickel sulfide project. We had a historical 43101 many years ago, but we'll be producing our first 43101, or the inaugural one for us, probably mid-November, and would expect probably 8 to 10 million tons at that stage, and that's probably the stage where it gets to be commercial. And so we're on the commerciality front. We signed a deal in the summer with a company called CVMR, and they are a large private nickel consortium, 18 plants around the world. So they're doing a feasibility study on NISC right now to expedite what they believe will be a nickel mine, or what we think will be as well. So jurisdictionally, Quebec is I think Canada's blessed in that there's almost all jurisdictions in Canada are really great. And as we said, I don't think it's not a Power Nickel against Fathom or something like that. We wish we love the Fathom project. I think it's a great project. I think all these things, probably are needed in the coming years ahead, if we're to believe the greening of the economy is indeed going to happen. Within Quebec, they've, I think, strategically as a province probably done the best job of setting up the infrastructure, to make, bringing these projects to commercial nature a little bit easier. So, the roads are there, power plants are there, regional airports, these types of things. Plus, they've thought through the First Nations situation very well. They've done advanced work with them, and like we're blessed. We're working with the James Bay Cree, who are probably one of the more progressive, First Nation groups because of Hydro-Quebec. They've had a lot of time to get commercial, and they're very sharp people, and they're and we're like just within 100 clicks of our project. There's 4 mines, either built or being built. So, very strong community support there, which is essential to any successful mining project. And then I guess, ultimately, since we're talking about building mines, it obviously gets down to the economics. And the economics are sort of twofold. One is your costs, which is driven somewhat by grade and then also by access to power and what your power might be. In our case, it's hydropower. But the incentive packages that are available in Quebec are top tier. We're getting basically 2-for-1 exploration these days, and now with the feds and the doing a 30% tax credit to federally help mines across the country, and each province has their own package. In Quebec, it's up to 25% to build and equip a new mine. So very favorable jurisdiction and obviously close proximity to markets. So all the good things.
Yeah, thanks, Terry. And I think you raised a couple points that will serve to segue well, I think, for me. I mean, first of all, these are all, Canada obviously is legendary for being a tier 1 jurisdiction. My point and what I was hoping to maybe try to get across here is that within that tier 1 jurisdiction, there are, because of provincial regulations, provincial authority from the charter, that different provinces are different jurisdictions. And I mean, what I like about this panel, I mean, BC, Saskatchewan, Quebec, Ontario are all independently 4 of the best in the world, right? And what I find interesting, though, is that there are, nevertheless, within that fact and that reality, there are still kind of just different approaches or different characteristics or uniquenesses that I kind of want to focus on with this, right? And I think, Terry, you had a really good point there about the infrastructure, and that's the transition I want to. I thought that the next question maybe makes sense to go to is just a discussion of infrastructure, and I don't mean like they're soft and hard. Yes, I mean highways and power substations, and if you're FIFO or not, but also kind of like that soft infrastructure, like human knowledge and workforce and kind of cultural or community attitudes, right? So maybe we'll work east to west this time. So we'll let Terry and Sean lead us off there. But do you just want to discuss what's that soft or hard infrastructure, if you're going to let me use that sort of terminology? What do you have in Saskatchewan that you believe kind of smooths that development process or encourages nickel projects to become producing nickel mines? Terry, you want to take us away on that one?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously, being located at Nemaska, we're not that far away from Val-d'Or and Rouen and these legendary, Quebec mining towns. So we obviously be able to tap into that talent base and for on the mining side, and then on the the equally important community relations side, because of the work Quebec has done with Quebec Hydro, much of the outreach and education and communication, with the First Nations has, been well established for many years, and they've got good protocols. They've built them in as partners, and so there's good lines of communications. There's good processes in place to advance projects with positive community relations, which is, I think, critical. Obviously, we touched earlier on the physical infrastructure being there, the roads, the hydro stations, the airports, those types of things, and then the fiscal incentives seem to be in place as well. So check for Quebec. Honestly, I can't think of a better spot to be, really. So we're super happy to be there and to be working within the community.
Yeah, you can't choose where the metals are, but you can choose where to look for the metals, right? And I think that finding those jurisdictions like you have, it's critical, right? But Sean, what are you those unique advantages in terms of that hard or soft infrastructure?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I've spent a big part of my career going to mines around the world, and as the non-technical person, always querying with whomever I was driving from the airport to the 8-hour drive. Have we checked all these places for the right metal? So that is a problem. We can't choose where the mineralization is, but again, where mine is, it's real easy. We're a half-hour drive outside of Timmins. So on the hard infrastructure side, we have roads down into our project. We're fed by hydropower presently. On my large-scale deposit, it actually had all been clear-cut for the most part by the logging companies. So there's actually a network of logging roads on top of my my large-scale deposit, the Carlang A Zone. So on the hard infrastructure side, we have pretty much all we need. On the soft side, we have easy access to labor and expertise. back in Timmins, more broadly across the district. We're just north of Sudbury. So there's a lot of mining activity and supply. I guess once we get further down the path towards development, we'll be in that, it's a push to try to get your hands on labor in this market because there's so much activity. So I think we're all challenged by that, whether we're going to be a camp operation or be a go live at home operation. But we definitely are well located for being able to tap into easy local sort of soft infrastructure like that.
Awesome. Thank you. And Ian?
Yeah, well, again, with respect to hard infrastructure, we're a little bit further off the sort of the main trail, so to speak. The Gochagger Lake project is within 20 kilometers of the highway that goes L'Orange north to the Athabasca Basin. And then the Albert Lake project, we're within sort of 50 to 60 kilometers of the nearest major highway as far as the crow flies. But again, history, they did take some pretty high grade ore out of the ground at what was the Rottenstone deposit, 1965 through 1969. And again, if I can just sort of fall back on the Athabasca Basin being in the very northern part of Saskatchewan. So, here, world-class uranium deposits and infrastructure was very quickly put in place to get that, very, very valuable uranium out of the ground. And so I think as we develop and as, if we can come forth with a very attractive project or deposits with respect to tons and grades, the infrastructure will sort of take care of itself because the province as a whole has a history of doing that and they know how to do it. And with respect to, labor force, we've been incredibly fortunate to draw on local communities for assistance, whether it's core cutters, whether it's diamond drillers, whether it's, cooks, camp people, again, tremendous workforce. And as the things progress, First Nations are starting to form their own companies and being a means to supply the valuable skills and the soft infrastructure, whether it be camp construction, expediting and all these things. So again, just, I think it's sort of universal across the country. We're famous for being able to find things and get things into production. And I think that's just a reflection on the, the communities as a whole and just the overall effort and desire to create jobs in the province of, in our case, the province of Saskatchewan.
Martin, what about you? Final thoughts on that one?
Yeah, the great comments there by some of the panelists. I mean, just in terms of where we're located, we're about 80 kilometers west of the Mount Milligan copper gold mine, which has been in operation for about 10 years now. Very similar scale operation to what we have in mind. Like Milligan, we've benefited historically from access, as Sean mentioned, for his project there, in terms of Forest Service roads, which are, maintained at a very high standard. I'd say a couple other themes there that I would pick up on. One is, the involvement of First Nations, both from an employment standpoint and from a business standpoint. When we do field programs, we have active drill programs at our project. We've seen in recent years that well over 50% of the labor has been provided by Indigenous locals, and well over 50% of the business opportunities have also been taken by First Nations-owned businesses, and I think that's critical to developing a project in a really modern 21st century way. Is ensuring, these projects can be used as a means of advancing reconciliation with Indigenous nations. With respect to infrastructure specifically on our project and from a mine development standpoint, the key piece of infrastructure offsite for us would be the construction of a power line to connect into the BC hydro grid. A few different options there in terms of where we could connect into, It's not a small piece of capital required to do that, but that's again where there's potentially interesting opportunities to work with Indigenous-led businesses to make that happen.
It resonates with me and you, the mutually beneficial nature of these projects, right? The 21st Century Mining Project, that community consultation and community buy-in. I like what you have to say there, Martin. This is going to be another question. I want to talk about kind of economic hurdles or the low versus high economic hurdles. So this is going to be a bit more hypothetical in nature, right? So we seek safe harbor and those sort of standard disclaimers. But I wanted you guys to maybe just provide some color, and Terry kind of called his shot already here with his tonnage goal, but bringing in all aspects, right? This is the taxation system, and if you have, if you can do toll milling 20 kilometers down the road, that sort of thing, right? But if I can be so bold as to ask you guys, like, what, in terms of tonnage and grade, because what I find interesting, just to take a sidestep here, is Sean's kind of in both worlds here, but we have two huge bulk tonnage low grade projects and then two smaller high grade projects, right? So I thought there could be some interesting conversations just around the different economic hurdles required to achieve economic viability. So I guess this they're not, like I say, very hypothetical in nature, but I mean could you, if we're going to start from west to east here again, maybe just some color or conversation, guys, on what is your goal? Like where do you think you're going, and where do you think you have to get to for these deposits to be economic enough to be extracted and exploited? Martin, do you want to try to take a crack at that one first?
Yeah, so I mean, with for us, we've completed a pre-feasibility study recently, so we've also obviously kind of thought long and hard about this and done a lot of modeling and engineering work around this. In brief, large and low grade can still be high margin and highly profitable. It's all down to what the rock value per ton is versus what your costs are to mine and process that. And so you can have, if you've got large tonnage, that can still be viable even at a total nickel grade of 0.2%. In the same way that porphyry copper mines at billion plus tons can be viable at 0.4, 0.5% copper head grade. So the advantage of these types of lower grade deposits is that scale and the ability to operate for multiple cycles and to have exposure to those up cycles. We know the nickel price is probably historically been the most volatile of the major base metals versus zinc and copper in terms of its pricing. So having that long life ability with these mines, well, it's not something that you can factor into an economic model. You need to typically use a single nickel price, but there's inherent, strategic optionality in having that exposure to multiple up cycles in the nickel price, where we know the price can go crazy for periods of time, and reliably at least once a decade it gets out of control, and that's typically where nickel mines really kind of make their money.
Thank you, Martin. And Ian, what are your thoughts on kind of the hurdles or standards for economic viability?
Well, we I think our sort of what we've been telling folk out there is we're looking for 1% nickel, and so the comment that Terry made, 8 to 10 million tons, and I think if I throw the figure 10 million tons out, that's kind of a safe number. So if we can find 1% nickel at 10 million tons, I think that suddenly becomes very, very attractive. And I think both projects have that potential. But again, I'm the geologist here, and the high grade stuff is hidden in the low grade stuff. And so the beautiful thing about nickel, and to Martin's comment, I think we're in the very early stages of a big bump here in the nickel price. And so as we're focusing on our 1% nickel, we can be bringing in some of the lower grade material as well. And then, of course, it's just the, how is the deposit oriented? Is it potentially something that can come out of the ground by open pit, or is it going to be a little bit deeper and we're faced with an underground operation? So as we go through our exploration, these sorts of questions are going to get answered. But again, I think the luxury we have at both projects is potentially a combination of both, where the Rottenstone deposit itself, it was an outcrop that was taken out by a small open pit. The historic resource at Gochagger Lake, was 4.3 million tons at a 0.3% nickel grade that was deemed to be open pittable. If we can move up to, let's say 20 to 25 million tons, and we have an overall grade, because we have high grade in amongst the lower grade, and if that grade is going to be 0.6, 0.7, that too suddenly becomes very, very attractive. So, we're a long ways away from, very much on the back of the envelope at this stage. But as things increase, and I think, we've been saying it for a long time, but we're on the cusp of a bull market in base metals. If the nickel price gets up to where it's supposed to go because of this crunch, I think things sort of fall into place a little bit quicker. But right now, our hurdles is we have to get to sort of a threshold as to what size of deposits are we potentially dealing with.
Thank you. And Sean, what are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, so as you mentioned at the start, I've got both. I'll tell you, on the low grade, which I call the large scale, we have an enormous thing near surface. From a business perspective, I get a little leery because I can't point to another nickel mine in the world that operates at a 0.25 grade. That said, I agree with Martin that we can look at the copper world, and the equivalent grades are certainly economic on that side. And then I think back to the challenge. You set it up as multiples of Voisey's Bay. I like to say to investors, look, it's almost 50 more Sudburys. So genuinely, something's got to give in terms of just getting more nickel supply into production. And especially when you layer onto that, the world becoming a much smaller place geopolitically, and the importance on carbon. So I think low carbon, low grade projects in places like Canada should be a go. So in terms of the economic viability of the low grade, I think there's a lot of things that are saying that to make these economic, they should be able to go in Canada. Over on the high grade, I'm like Fathom. We've got 1% grade in our resource now. That's really our target. We think we have a bunch more of those types of deposits across our land package. And we think we can bolt those together to be a good high grade business. And perhaps that's the kind of thing we get started on. And then we've got the optionality with the larger scale deposit, or we think about a phased approach where we get up and running with our high grade because that's viable now. And then we continue to move the low grade, large scale project along, and we figure out if the market's going to support that. So I think viability is a great question and a great place to focus. My company has both sides of that coin, which has been purposefully done.
No, excellent. And to you, Terry?
Yeah, I mean, I guess obviously we've been, because we're high grade, we've been focusing on the high grade economics, and I think, Ian mentioned 10 million tons and 100,000 contained tons of nickel and high grade nickel sulfide that for its own plant. That's I think the threshold that you have to get to be considered to be commercially viable, by industry. And I think for us, we'll be there shortly, like in weeks. And then we think there's going to be a bunch more. I mean, the CapEx again is dependent really on the project you've got, right? So probably for a project like ours, you're probably looking at, I don't know, something in the $300 to $400 million US range is my guess. The good news now with the government's potentially the tax credits being there, providing a big chunk of that, that can really dramatically improve the IRR. The challenge we all face across the board on the panel is, at some point we'll have to contribute equity, and our equity prices, don't reflect the value of our resources across the board. And it's in the 5 or 10% of the true value, is my guess, and without being blasphemous, but yeah, there's that's always going to be a challenge, and obviously the bigger the capex, the bigger the challenge. So the governments are doing their thing to try and be helpful and create environments where it's feasible to do this, but and industry is going to be there as well, and offtake agreements, etc. There's a lot of ways to plumb bob these things into production, but at some point in time, the equity markets have to come back, and we'll have a role to play as well, and that's probably our single biggest challenge.
Well, I think it's an interesting point that you guys are all kind of relaying or touching on, is that if this is not an either or situation, it's both and, right? We need FPX and EV and Fathom and Power Nickel, right? That even just there's obviously different standards about stated policy versus projected outcomes, but even if you just sit on the stated policy of automakers and OEMs, right? That you have to have all this nickel, right? That re-rating to accommodate 0.2%, it almost is inevitable. There almost is no choice if we want to reach these demands, right? So it is not a matter of picking that one that you think is going to be a winner, but that if we are going to come even close as like a global society or whatever to accomplishing these goals, that it's going to have to be one big wide open door welcoming all of these projects. And that's why I'm a nickel bull. I think nickel is a very strong, compelling reason to be positive about it for at least the next decade, right? Maybe I'll ask this question then. Let me just circle back here. I kind of just I did a little digging, and I just looked at recent changes or proposed policy changes on a province by province basis. So I thought maybe I would just I guess I'm going to ask you gentlemen about changes your province has made to its mining or permitting process lately. I'm going to kind of maybe to begin the conversation by giving you what I found, and if you wanted to provide color on that or why it was significant to you, go for it. Or if you had something else in mind, you can tell me to buzz off and ring in with your own answer, right? So let's where we started. We'll go west to east. Well, let's go east to west again, because I'd like to have a larger conversation with Martin at the end. But so Quebec, right? So Terry, my understanding is obviously Quebec, again, world famous. It's got everything you ever need to be a mine. But I was looking into their 2023 to 2033 infrastructure plan, right? And these significant increases on spending that is presumed, it can't get enough of a good thing, I guess, when it comes to infrastructure spending, right? But do you just want to discuss, where have you seen that impact? My understanding is they're already accelerating, that they're increasing funding, tens of billions of dollars a year. Have you seen kind of the benefits of that starting to rear its head, or are there projects or something related to that you want to discuss, just to discuss Quebec's recent policy changes?
I've been obviously talking to the provincial government representatives, and they've been very proactive to be supportive of Power Nickel and what we're trying to do, and they've got a lot of different arms within the government to streamline things, to introduce you to financial opportunities, to raise capital, to grants and programs that they have available to expedite various elements of your project. Helping you with the First Nations, those sorts of things. They're certainly being very proactive. On the permitting side of things, they're certainly talking about streamlining things. We haven't gotten into the advanced stages of it. I have obviously been an investor in other companies and seen it, and I think they've made some progress. I think they'll tell you straight up that they need to make more. When we look at it, I would say it's going to take at least 3 years to permit the thing for sure, and that would be a good effort. And then 2 years to build. So then start whenever you start, and that's your timeline. And what you need to make the go decision from. But generally speaking, the Quebec government is aligned to really get behind creating an EV industry in Quebec from soup to nuts. So from the mine right through to the electric vehicles. So they're certainly fully committed to that. You can see that from the announcements they made, to whether it be the refinery with Vale or the Northvolt battery plant or the precursor products with the Koreans. I mean, they're certainly rolling out the carpet and the incentive packages and streamlining, land packages, everything they can do to create a battery metals hub is being done. So that's super beneficial for folks like ourselves who can feed into that. And they clearly, nickel is a big one. There's not a lot of class 1 nickel out there that, as somebody mentioned earlier about low carbon, and that's, I think, going to be a big point. I was talking with, I was at a thing with happened to chat with the Ford purchaser for nickel, and they had just done their deal with Indonesia and with Vale, and I said, you better hope I don't sell mine to GM because you guys will be in trouble. He said, why do you say that? And I said, well, can you imagine you get the pristine, hydro green nickel coming from Quebec, and then you've got the rainforest nickel. You can imagine, I said, you can imagine how that's going to go down. He said, well, you know what? This is this interim period. You're not coming out until 28, 29, 30. We definitely need your nickel in. So, it's funny, but I think the carbon nature of nickel will be a big part of it. So that'll be one of those things I think that will be impacting the building decisions as well too.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that carbon sequestration nature that I know a couple of you guys have that as part of your project, right? And that, yeah, like you say, emerging huge portion of that for sure, right? I mean, that not all nickel is created equal by any stretch. You had an interesting, I think that probably all of you would say streamlining permitting, right? That's a huge thing in Canada right now, is the streamlining of permitting process, right? And how do we encourage and advocate for mining projects without sacrificing kind of those environmental standards or that we've come to enjoy and appreciate in Canada. So, I mean, Sean, that's a decent segue for you. My understanding is in the spring that Doug Ford announced that they were going to try to streamline permits, right? That they were going to try to allow you to, streamlining permits to get recovering minerals from mine tailings, allowing you to start production with only a conditional closure plan in place. I mean, has this been passed? Have you seen changes already? Is there a consultation? Can you, just like providing kind of context or color on this idea of Ontario trying to streamline their permitting actively?
Yeah, so they modernized the Mining Act. That has been passed. The examples that you referenced there, I believe those are parts of the new act. They're not a focus of my company and what we're trying to do, but they are an example of our provincial government gets it, that we need all the projects across or getting closer to and then crossing the line into production. So we have a hugely supportive government in Ontario and completely aligned, as I mentioned before, completely aligned with the federal government. So what I'm really excited to do as I hopefully move our project forward along our high grade and low grade tracks are for the low grade, where it's going to be of the size where the feds are definitely involved. We've already had commitments from the federal government bureaucrats and political staff and at the provincial level that our project will be one where we'll do what they claim is going to happen in future, where we're going to have parallel reviews. So it's not going to be sequential, which sort of doubles your timeline, doubles your efforts. We've got governments that claim that they're going to be completely coordinated. So I'm excited to get to that stage, and I hope it'll be straightforward and treated effectively. But really, that's how I see the government sort of reacting to the imperative that we get much more production. And doing what they can do, which is that regulatory piece, and not at all dropping the requirements, but just becoming a lot more efficient about the requirements, which I think, frankly, Canadian issuers like us trying to develop projects in our own country, we're really, at least I think, we need the strongest possible guardrails, but clarity on the guardrails. And then we as business will exist within those guardrails. And that's what I'm seeing from the province of Ontario, that they're all on board for that strategy.
Excellent. And just as a quick follow-up, I mean, have you, like you say, maybe not necessarily relevant to yourself quite yet, but I mean, just based on your peer group and people you talk to, have you seen improvements? Like it's been a few months now. I mean, has that started to kind of show through?
Yeah, it's beginning to. I think one of the real challenges is, of course, that we have like an understaffed bureaucracy, which may sound strange that I want more bureaucrats, but frankly, the more staff we're able to have at the ministry operating efficiently, the more can get done. So that it continues to be a problem in our province, that they're drawing from a similar labor pool as all the mining companies are, right? So for skilled technical labor, it's tight, and it's tight for both companies and also on the regulator side. So the staffing issue is something that I've seen them begin to make small steps on. You referenced changes in the legislation specifically around trying to mine tailings. I have heard about more startups and innovation on that front, which is really neat, right? Yeah. It's like, this is what happens when you set clear guardrails. We will then innovate and react in accordance. So I've seen some changes. And again, it's really just about the positive support. Like our mines minister grew up just a few kilometers north of our project. So we have the former mayor of Timmins, but he's not just from Timmins, he's from South Porcupine, which is just at the top of the Shaw Dome. So we have a hugely interested and aligned provincial government in Ontario right now for us.
Excellent. Yeah, no, thank you, Sean. And so I got to admit, I'm from Saskatchewan. So, I mean, Fathom Nickel, it's a little bit of a home field advantage. I'll try to be neutral, but I think Saskatchewan's a great jurisdiction. Obviously, all four of these ones are here. But Ian, do you just want to discuss? So my understanding, and just again, looking through old, recent news, mineral exploration tax credit, there's a proposed change. I think maybe it got voted in. You'll probably know better than I will, but just changing the tax credit from 10% to 30%, making exploration incentives just, very competitive. I mean, you can go off on your own tangent if you want, Ian, but do you want to discuss what that 10% to 30% increase, what that means to explorers like you? Yeah, well,
the province of Saskatchewan, they're putting incentives, so they're encouraging exploration, and there was we get a rebate, and have been getting rebates on, we drill X number of meters and spend X number of dollars. And they were, when this first incentive came out, it was sort of restricted geographically. They just kind of said, well, it's only people looking for this in this sort of area, you'll get your rebate. Well, they've since expanded on that. And now it's encompassing the entire province. So it doesn't really matter what particular metal you're exploring for. So the government of Saskatchewan has changed that policy, again, sort of incentivizing exploration. So they're, and then on residents of Saskatchewan, in terms of, flow through shares. So there's the federal level, and then individual provinces. Quebec does this as adds on for provincial residents, so that they can take even more advantage of a flow through type share offering. And then I think in terms of policy and in terms of permitting. The Saskatchewan Mining Association is very, very proactive, and they have been, they're sort of the middle ground between industry and government, and it's a very good voice. And I must say that I've spent most of my exploration career in the province of Saskatchewan, and it's continue evolving process. Try and just make it sort of when you're putting in a permit application, everybody's doing it the same way, and then it sort of gets, when it gets into the hand of the folks that ultimately reward the permit, it's kind of the same format, which just expedites the whole process. So it's constantly evolving, and I think that's a very, very positive thing. And again, the Saskatchewan Mining Association, just a tremendous group to help explorers voice opinion, and then ultimately it gets up into the upper levels of government, and then it filters back down to the expiration. And I think a very something that absolutely has to happen in this country. I mean, exploration is not easy. Finding mines is not easy. Developing mines is not easy, but we have to speed this process up. We have to get these things to market quicker than historically has been happening. And I think, there's a tremendous responsibility on all of us to, voice that very opinion, but also to educate everybody involved just how critical this is going forward. And I think Saskatchewan is listening, and I think that's a tremendous thing. But across the country, we really need to speed the whole process up, because just touching on, I think the comment that Terry was speaking about, Ford and the rainforest nickel. That's another good way of putting it. This is going off on a bit of a tangent here, but I think it's very, very important as Class 1 type nickel explorers that we, it's a little bit of an oxymoron that Indonesia is coming to market with all this nickel, but at tremendous environmental cost. And as we go through our projects and as we develop our projects, it's very, very important that we educate that we are green in the process to the green ultimate product, whereas Indonesia is just not, and by nature, laterite deposits, they're just very, very energy intensive, and they're very, very destructive. So, I think this is all part of our responsibility going forward, is just educating all jurisdictions as to the benefits of these projects.
Yeah, well said, Ian. I think that actually dovetails nicely. I think I'll just preface this by saying I'm sure Martin, if he had a nickel for every time he's been asked this question the last month or two, he probably wouldn't have to work anymore. But I do want, I before I ask you your question, Martin, I mean, what Ian just said resonates with me, right? That I think that Canada could and should be like an exemplar of what a mine can be, right? That the standards we have and the policies we have, and that if we do this right, we can be supplying actual carbon neutral nickel for a carbon neutral world that isn't, like poisoning a river and destroying a rainforest, right? And so there has to be some sort of sea change in terms of public perception and attitudes towards the mineral extraction industry in Canada, because if it has to happen, I want it happening here, right? And I'm kind of speaking as personally, right? So, but Martin, and so I'll say to you, Martin, it does resonate with me. I mean, greenwashing is an issue, right? And people just kind of staple things onto their projects, and it's not really a part of what they actually take seriously. But they just know if they check these boxes, they can kind of get more support. I mean, I think that FPX, this is something that is that kind of fundamental to the core of your company, is your approach to these things, right? Is that you are trying to be that exemplar, right? And that's part of why I like FPX and why I think it's such a compelling story. So I guess just with that framing in mind, I haven't never spoke to you live before, so I think I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you this question, right? But do you just want to, right, the Supreme Court ruling, right, September 26th, that duty to consult gets handed down. You got 18 months to modernize the Mineral Tenure Act. Do you just, like I say, I know you've probably answered this 1,000 times by now, but what sort of local knowledge or insight or context can you provide? I mean, what does this mean? What are the ramifications? And I mean, maybe if I'm leading you on a bit, but why is it maybe the concerns are overstated or fears are overstated sometimes? If you just want to kind of explore that.
Yeah, so you're referring to kind of the process whereby, prospectors or companies can acquire or stake new ground in BC, and the view by the Supreme Court that there needs to be more consultative process ahead of that staking. What that means for how staking actually happens in actual fact going forward is an open question. It doesn't affect any kind of existing mineral claims, which is important to note. I mean, this is really about how BC as a province, Canada as a country, implements the kind of the precepts of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And BC is really on the front lines of having acknowledged those precepts and is trying to actually action making those real in how business is conducted here, both with respect to mineral exploration and other industries. So we're kind of on the leading edge of that here in BC in putting that into practice. And I think ultimately these are going to be standards that are then going to filter out to the rest of the country and to other Western countries for whom, you know, proper treatment of Indigenous groups is paramount. You know, more broadly on BC with respect to its kind of its kind of critical mineral strategy. I think it's being perceived to date as being a little bit behind Ontario and Quebec in sort of publishing that strategy. You know, I'm glad to say that we, FPX, as well as Tech Resources, were the two mining companies that are part of a current advisory committee that is advising the province on how to develop that critical mineral strategy, which will be published early in the new year. And what we're seeing behind the scenes there is a really, you know, strong approach that the province is taking to make sure that, you know, Indigenous groups are involved in that process. These projects really run through obtaining consent from Indigenous groups. And so I think as you see that BC strategy being developed and implemented, you'll see that, you know, as opposed to some of the other provinces where it's a bit of, you know, we'll just make it happen quicker come hell or high water. Here, I think the approach is a bit more to do it hand in hand with Indigenous groups. And I think ultimately for the longer term, that is the best approach.
Yeah, no, thank you. It's an interesting, like you say, that transition from theory, right, UNDRIP being kind of aspirational goals to actually making them concrete. It's a very interesting conversation, which maybe, I'll put a pin in it for now because we only have a few minutes left here. Gentlemen, I think those are the kind of the questions I've got. There's just a few from the audience here that I'll just try to dip into here. They're company specific, but so. I'll ask them just so they could, you know, people can feel good about being heard. Aaron Cohen, I guess a question for all of you here. Governments in the U.S. and EU are increasingly demanding mineral supply that will support transitioning to green energy. Probably won't ask all of you to answer this one. I mean, Sean or Terry, do you guys want to just maybe chew on how do each of your projects address this issue specifically? Sean, do you want to try that one out?
Yeah, I'm working on supplying nickel, and you know, for the U.S. market, as I said before, I'm within 1,000 kilometers of the current automaking hub and the sort of top of the I-75 when they talk about the I-75 corridor. So for the U.S. side, you know, that's a key market for us, especially as we talk about the volumes out of the potential large-scale track for my company. In terms of the EU, we're under CA with a couple of European automakers, probably for their North American requirement, their North American demand, because under the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, automakers are all coming to the US to build plants so they can take advantage of those same subsidies and sell vehicles into the US market. So, you know, we are hoping to be supplying nickel, and it's in line with the government policies of both the US and the EU.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, and Terry, just thoughts from you? Anything to any daylight or difference between your answer and Sean's?
No, I think Sean sort of you know, hit all the major points. You know, in most miners would, you know, produce a concentrate which would go to a refinery, which ultimately become precursors and these sorts of things. We're evaluating, you know, actually, you know, if the CVMR would actually produce a finished product, so precursors, powders, wires, anodes, that type of thing. So, so when you get to the finished products business, you actually, you know, then start to talk to finished products customers. So there's a, you know, and it's obviously the EV industry is foremost in there, but nickel is used for lots of other stuff, you know, like 3D printing is is nickel. So it's growing like crazy. The defense sector, CVMR, that's their biggest client. So there's a lot of applications for nickel. Obviously we're focused a lot on EVs, and obviously a big chunk of our output would go that way. But there's a number of higher value targets out there that because we need to not just be thinking about the LME price of nickel. There's the refined price of nickel that you can get to, and that those conversations are now being had with miners now that we would never had them before. We're never given that opportunity, but I think that's on the table too.
Good. And you know what? We got maybe time for one more question here, and I'll ask Martin, and if we got time, I'll let Ian take us home. But just a question around that public perception. I mean, what is the role of individual mining companies or individual resource companies, Martin, and how do you change people's minds? I guess that's a pretty blunt question, right? I mean, if we do agree there's a degree of resistance to Canadian mineral exploitation, and I mean, I think everybody in the room here agrees that there's a necessity to it. Maybe the public doesn't understand. How do you begin changing that perception?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, the mining industry has been losing a public relations battle for probably the last 50 or 60 years. And there's a reason for that. There's a lot of sort of scandals and other unfortunate incidents in the history of mining, both in Canada and abroad. However, I think all of us working in a 21st century context can probably point to a number of great success stories, both for exploration companies, but also operating companies that do things the right way, and that the Canadian mining sector, operates at the highest standards of anywhere in the world. And I think really just highlighting those success stories, it comes down to spend. I mean, I think I look at some of the large Canadian mining companies who are supposed to be the Canadian mining champions. I think they need to be spending a lot more money, frankly, on that kind of public outreach. And it's something that will help them to secure the future of their businesses in the jurisdictions in which they wish to operate, in which they choose to operate, being Canada and the United States and other countries like that. So there's a certain degree of just brute force spend that I think the major mining companies have to engage in much the same way that we see the energy companies in Canada do that. They really inundate the hockey games and others with advertisements that really points the benefits of their business. And I think the mining industry has that same opportunity, but arguably has an even better story to tell than the energy industry does in terms of the vital importance of our products and the great success stories where we can collaborate with local communities and really benefit the economy and actually serve to be a net benefit to the environment with respect to carbon emissions. So there's a great story there that needs to be told. It's just about spending the money, I think, to go out and tell it right.
Well said. Ian, I'll just give you the chance if you've got a thought in your head that maybe you can add on or extend something that Martin is saying, but I'll give you the chance to. You got the last kick at the can here in the last few seconds.
Okay. Well, I think what Martin just said just speaks volumes. The electric vehicles, yes, they're going to be a wonderful thing, but there's so many other things that need to fall into place so that we can plug our respective cars in when it's 35 below zero. So just the overall education to this process and this concern of the climate change as a whole and what we can do if electrifying our vehicles is one way of doing it. There's an awful lot of education that needs to take place because it's not going to happen overnight. And then, again, I couldn't, Martin, you're bang on there. We've had this bad reputation for 50, 60 years, and yet here in Canada, tremendous success stories. We do it right. We're recognized around the world as not only great exploration people, but we can get things into production, and we do things the right way. So we need to, again, it's education. Just as we continue to explore and as we continue to raise money for the things that we're going to do, We need to be educating the public that we are doing things for the better of society as a whole.
No, excellent. So I think I'll call it there, gentlemen. We're 2 minutes past what I was hoping for. Martin, Sean, Ian, Terry, and all you guys. I mean, FPX, EV Nickel, Fathom Nickel, Power Nickel, 4 great projects, 4 projects I know well myself. Thanks for tuning. Matt Mickleborough from JRI, and that's it. Thanks, guys.